Hey guys, I'm Jared Ragsdale with Nutrithority, and welcome to Know Your Macros. So we're going to go over everything macro related today. First, I want to start out with, if you're watching this and trying to figure out, is this program for me? You'll see who this program is going to benefit. We're going to go over everything from, the most beginning topic to the more advanced topic. So if you're starting out and you have no idea where to begin with macros, we're going to cover it from the very beginning. If you've done macros for a long time, I think I have a lot of little pitfalls that you may, succumb to that I can help you avoid. So if you're frustrated with your lack of progress, or if you're just wanting to understand a deeper, level of your macros, this is the program for you guys. So what you're going to learn today, we're obviously going to learn about macros, what they are, and how they function in your body, from protein, carbs, and fats. And then we're going to go over how to determine the right macros for you and your specific goals, as well as how to track your macros properly. And lastly, after we've tracked your macros, we're going to figure out how to fine-tune your macros to make sure that they are working for you and your body, because everybody's a little bit different on this kind of stuff, and nothing that I take from one person to another person is going to work absolutely for each person. So it's all individual. We're going to help figure out how that works for you today. And but first, because macros is overwhelming to some people, and it may seem like this program has a lot of information in it, you may be wondering why you should really focus on your macros. Well, once you understand macros, and once you're able to put your macros in place and really understand how it works, what to change, and really, at that point, you're in control. You're in control of your diet, in control of your life. What you eat is no longer worrying about somebody else and what they tell you. So then the confidence that you have in what you're doing goes up drastically. So you're in control, you're confident, you know that what you're doing is going to work. If you decide not to take the time to learn this, you're always going to be spinning your wheels, jumping from diet to diet, and out of control, hoping that someone helps you. So instead of looking for the next trick, start with the basics, dig down into the macros, what each one does, and how it's going to work for you. So this is me. I'm Jared Ragsdale, as you can see, and I just want to tell you a little bit of my story real quick. I am the founder of Nutrithority, and that's not where I began. So, I grew up a kid, not happy with the way that I looked, wanted to change it. I started studying nutrition, training, things like that as early as middle school. Is kind of when I started. I remember changing diets and changing carbohydrate intake and things like that back whenever I was in middle school. And, as silly as it sounds, I was telling my friends' dads, what my workout splits were whenever I was in middle school. And, this day I work on abs and chest and this and that. And, a lot's changed since then. Back then, I did not know nearly what I know now. But through, over a decade of trial and error, I started to figure it out over time. Then I opened my other company called 316 Fit, and you'll see a little bit of that at the top right of the screen. And 316 Fit is where I helped thousands of people just like you to take control over their own nutrition, their training, things like that. So I actually would set up a program for people. I would help track them from week to week to week and help them make the changes that they're looking for in their diets. So I've had a lot of experience on this. I'm taking all of this from, what I've gained from working with clients, from changing diets for, thousands of people at this point in time, from bodybuilders that I put on stage to housewives, jiu-jitsu athletes. I mean, anybody you can imagine at this point in time, I've pretty much worked with them and I've helped them change their body. And so, the reason that I started Nutrithority was really based off of my own struggles and my experience with 316 Fit and the products that I wanted to recommend to people. Ultimately I was trying to grab a product from this brand and this brand and this brand, and nothing ever quite fit exactly what I was hoping for. As the more I studied, the more in depth I got on, nutrition, on supplementation, on training, things like that. The products that were available just didn't quite fit exactly what I was looking for. And I remember specifically back whenever I was doing my last bodybuilding show in 2015, I was looking for a product that was a non-stimulant fat burner. And I couldn't find what I was looking for. And there was nothing on the market like what I wanted. And so ultimately that became the product Thermite. And, that's how all the products form, is through a need of some sort, either through, feedback from customers over years, from, speaking to customers in retail stores, which is kind of where, Nutrithority started with my family's retail stores, Supplement Giant. I helped, thousands and thousands of people help find the right products. But more so than that, I helped them really figure out what they liked and what they didn't like about products. And that kind of feedback over years really helped shape what I was looking for whenever I created Nutrithority. What are the important things that really came into play for people. What is important about a protein powder? What do they like about protein powder? Beyond just the nutritional information and the science that I've studied, but what do they like in flavor and texture and taste and quality? What are they looking for? And for every single product that we create, ultimately that's the answer to those problems that I had and the customers had when they came in the store. So Nutrithority was born out of a need for higher quality supplements, better tasting supplements, and in kind of a unique take on what the supplement industry needs and is looking for. So you might be wondering why I'm teaching all of this stuff for free when there's a lot of courses out there that end up charging you hundreds of dollars for similar kind of information. And truly I struggled on my own trying to understand macros for years, and I really wish that I had known this kind of stuff whenever I was going through it originally, that I had somebody that set me down and said, this is how macros work, this is how you put them all together, here's kind of a starting point for macros, and this is how you're going to adjust it. I feel like if I would have had that kind of base, I really would have gotten a lot further with my own nutritional information. And I do feel like this is a responsibility of mine because I've been in this industry for so long. I've helped a lot of people, and since we started Nutrithority, I've stepped back from 316 Fit. I'm no longer doing my training company, so I'm not able to help the people that I was helping in the beginning. And while supplements are a very critical part and crucial in progress, they don't compare to something like your training and your nutrition. And those are the foundations. If you can get the right training and nutrition and see the results on your own, supplements accelerate that progress drastically. And so what I want to give you is that base. I want to help you find that base foundation so that when you do use my products, the results are extreme rather than relying on the products to do the work for you, because supplements can only do so much. They're not going to put in the work. They're not going to go to the gym for you. They're not going to follow your diet for you or anything like that. What they're going to give you is an edge, and they're going to help you. If it's fat loss, it may make fat loss easier. You're going to be burning more calories. Maybe your appetite's suppressed a little bit better. Maybe it's easier to stick with. Maybe you're boosting your metabolism or shutting down cortisol or all those different things that the supplements that we've designed to do help with fat loss. But they can't eat the diet for you. They can't help you prepare your meals and know exactly what you're going to eat. So today, that's what we're going over. And right now I want to show you kind of, what are macros? Because there are a lot of people that, may not know exactly what, macros are. And so I want to start from the very basics, because even if you're watching this and you know what they are and you think it's incredibly simple, most people truly don't understand macros, what they're doing for them, and kind of where they go. So, what we're going to look at on macros, we're going to learn how to decipher a nutrition label and see what's important in that nutrition label and what you should pay attention to, because it's a key part of, tracking your macros, knowing what's healthy, knowing what you should eat, is knowing exactly what you should look at on a label, what's important, what's not important. So we're going to go through that first. We're going to look at what the difference is between macros and calories, the caloric differences between the macros, and the different roles that each different macronutrient plays in our body, and the overall process behind that. So first, this is a nutrition label. My designer Dan grabbed this one. I have no idea where it came from, but this will work perfect for our goals. So when you see this nutrition label, you see it on every single product that you buy at the grocery store or anything like that, unless it's completely natural. And so when you're looking at a nutrition label like this is where all the macros are. And so you'll see the first thing you want to pay attention to is your serving size, because if you're not paying attention to the serving size, you don't know what you're taking in. And nutrition labels are notorious for using small serving sizes, being deceiving, things like that. So the calories look like it's a good, healthy product, but you see on this one, it's a 0.25 quarter a cup. So 51 grams. 51 grams if this was ice cream is a incredibly small serving, and that's why it's only 100 calories. You're going to get less than a Jello cup worth of ice cream, and that's 100 calories in ice cream. So if that's what it is, you have to pay attention to the serving size, and that's your first indicator. So look at that first before you look at anything else. Then you look at the calories, which is below it, which is the 100 calories that I just mentioned. And in my mind, I always think protein, carbs, and fats, which are your main macronutrients. Those protein, carbs, and fats, and I always go in that order. So when I look at stuff, I look at protein on the bottom first, and then I look at the carbohydrate content, and then I look at the fat content. What you're going to notice, protein's pretty simple, 3 grams. There's not much more to it than protein. There is a difference in protein quality from chicken and beef and soy protein and things like that. And I'm not really going to dive into that kind of stuff. I'll leave that for a later video on maybe better food sources and things like that. This one's going to be strictly macronutrients and going off of what's on the label and how to fit that into your diet. The food sources you can kind of pick and choose. Obviously, we all know processed is not nearly as good as natural most of the time. So the more natural, the better. On the carbohydrates part of this, you'll see it's 9 grams of carbohydrates. You'll see underneath that is the 2 grams of dietary fiber, and then you're going to see the sugar. So really what you're looking at is that out of that total 9 grams, 2 of those grams are fiber, so that leaves 7 grams that are not, and then 1 gram is sugar, so that leaves 6 grams that are carbohydrates that are other than fiber and sugar. Not terribly important, because whenever I track macros, I do count the fiber as part of my daily carbohydrate total. So when you're tracking macros, that 9 grams, this amount right here, is the amount that you go by. You don't subtract any of the fiber, things like that. It'll make your life easier. Truly, there's a lot of fiber that still digests and has a caloric content, so we're not going to mess with getting rid of that. Above that, you're going to see the fat. And total fat, 7 grams. Below that, you'll see there is saturated fat and trans fat and things like that. Now, you can pay attention to those. Trans fat, obviously, you don't want trans fat. Saturated fat, on the other hand, can be beneficial. We've kind of gone back and forth on nutrition over the last 50 years. Saturated fat's terrible for you. Now saturated fat's awesome for you, and so it all fits in there. I mean, saturated fat's in a lot of great foods, coconut oils and things like that. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. For the point of this program, protein, carbs, and fats, as they lay right here, is exactly how we're going to look at them. And those are the main important parts of what you're looking at on a label: serving size, calories, and your macros. If you want to pay attention to sodium and cholesterol and things like that, you can. They're not necessary by any means. Sodium is not going to cause you not to lose weight, so you can have a little bit of water retention from sodium. But water retention, as I made talk about in a different video or something, can actually help with your workouts while you're dieting, give you better mind-muscle connection by being able to contract the muscle better and that kind of thing. So this is all we're going to look at for today. So on the next slide, we're going to look at macros versus calories, because you may not know exactly what the differences are between the two. So macros are the main nutrients that make up the foods we eat, which are protein, carbs, and fats, as I said before. And the calories are the amount of energy that's in each food source. So in the protein, the amount of energy that's in protein, the amount of energy that's in carbs, and the amount of energy that's in fats. That's how you can look at it. It's a simplistic view, but that's the difference between calories versus macros, which ultimately, if your macros are in check and you're following your macros, calories naturally are in check. The opposite is not true. If your calories are in check, your macros are not necessarily where you want them to be. So macros is the better way to go, and by doing macros, your calories will naturally fall into place. So you don't have to worry about calories nearly as much, maybe only for adjustment period of times and things like that. So all the macronutrients have a different caloric value per gram, or I guess there's one specifically that has a different value, because protein and carbs are both 4 calories per gram. So 1 gram of protein is 4 calories. 1 gram of carbs, 4 calories. Pretty simple. Fat is 9 calories per gram, so it's over double. So if you think about it, carbs, 2 grams of carbs is almost as many calories as 1 gram of fat. Fat can add up very quickly, and so it's something that you do need to pay attention to, and that's where the caloric differences and how you set your diet up come into play a little bit more. There is another one, alcohol, which is 7.1 calories per gram. Not a true macronutrient, but your body is using it as an energy source, so pay attention to that. If you're going to drink alcohol whenever you're dieting on a macro-based diet, it has to be factored in some way. Easiest way is usually just to count it as your fat. You'll be a couple calories off, which will be in your favor more than anything else, but not something we need to worry about too much. So just know the alcohol has a calorie count just by itself, and it would be considered part of another macronutrient. So with protein has a specific role in our body. It has a lot of different specific roles. And so protein is just a bunch of amino acids that are all bound together, and those help control other functions in our body. Growth and maintenance of tissue like muscle, things like that. They help form hormones. Growth hormone's a good example. It's 191 amino acids bound together. Your body creates all those through the proteins that you take in, and then it also helps provide structure for tendons and ligaments. Typically, that's all created through the foods that we eat. Your body takes the protein, you digest all that protein, it cleaves them all off all those amino acids and down into, di and tripeptides, and then down into individual amino acids, which all then control, everything else that's going through your body. Protein is typically the one that I say is the most important thing we need to focus on with our diets, and it's always undereaten by our typical diets because carbs and fats are easy to take in, they're delicious. Most foods and junk foods are made up of carbs and fats. They're not made up of excess protein. Protein is also the hardest one to overeat, and the calories in protein aren't quite as detrimental if it's overeaten as carbs, or as the calories in carbs and fats. So that's the basic overview of protein. With carbohydrates, we have a different role. goal. Carbohydrates are your energy source, and so it's the easiest energy source that you have. You do have other ones, but carbohydrates are the easiest energy source for your body. It takes those carbohydrates, breaks them down, and turns them into glucose, which is an active form of energy that your body uses, versus glycogen, which is stored for later use, which is stored in the liver and in the muscle. So your body, whenever it eats carbohydrates, it'll take those, store them temporarily as glycogen. You can tap into that glycogen whenever you have the need for it, so like exercise or high intensity weight training, things like that. And in carbohydrates, you also have fiber, which fiber helps with digestion. It also slows down the digestion, and it helps maintain a steady blood sugar level. So you can think of the glycemic index that you may have heard of. A glycemic index is essentially how quick it's going to spike insulin levels. Well, what fiber does is it slows the rate that food drops through your stomach and how fast it digests, which slows how much blood sugar is released at one time. So it maintains a more steady rate. So fiber is always great to get in there, and that's why your high fiber foods are always a lower glycemic index than other foods like your candies and sugars and things like that. Carbohydrates, now, they are not essential, but carbohydrates are definitely incredibly useful, and I think you'll see more here soon. But if you do not have carbohydrates, your body will make carbohydrates. So that's through gluconeogenesis. It's basically where your body takes amino acids, and in a need where it really needs them, it'll either take amino acids from the food that you eat, or it'll take amino acids from muscle. And so that's where muscle loss comes from. And your body will actually take amino acids and turn it into glucose. And it's a terribly inefficient process, which is why if you've ever had just a protein-only diet, usually you're tired, but your body is great at not dying. And that's really what you need to understand with all this stuff, is that your body is resilient. Your body is finding ways to do things that stop you from losing muscle, from losing fat, and that kind of thing. And so our goal is to try to help our body understand our goal and to work with us in this process. So now you might be wondering about ketogenic diets, because they are not they have a very, very low amount of carbohydrates, usually less than 30 grams of carbs, or 5% of your total intake for a ketogenic diet. And in a ketogenic diet, your body will switch the energy source that it uses from glucose over into ketones, that are made from fat. And so that's your new energy source. But in that sense, there's still a need for glucose for your brain, and your body will still take amino acids, a small amount, and turn that into glucose for brain function and things like that throughout the day. So while ketogenic diets are perfectly safe, there is no benefit of a ketogenic diet over a carbohydrate-based diet. What you'll find is maybe there's a benefit for one person over the other, but keto diets aren't providing a better energy source. In my personal opinion, it's more how you're going to figure your diet, how you're going to utilize your diet. If you have all high glycemic carbohydrates, you're going to have these big energy rushes and a crash. If you give a little kid candy, they're going to get hyperactive for a little while, they're going to crash, and they're going to become jerks. And if your diet is the same way, you're going to have an energy boost and a crash, and you're going to have these peaks and valleys throughout the day, and you're going to feel terrible. And a ketogenic diet, solves that for a lot of people, because there's no longer a boost in carbohydrates. There's no glucose coming through, no glycogen, there's no blood sugar, things like that. So your body has to maintain it all, and fat digests very slowly. So it's a very steady level for energy and things like that. But ketogenic diets do not provide quite as much explosive energy, things like that, for workouts. It can be a good fat loss, diet, but we're going over macros. I'm including all the macros, and this is my program, so we're not gonna go with ketogenic diets today. We'll talk about it more some other time. And now to fat's role, which is used in ketogenic diets. So fat is a low activity energy source. So when you're walking, when you're sitting, when you're doing very little, your heart rate is very low, typically you're burning fat. You're not going to burn your glucose, your glycogen, or anything like that. You're just going to be burning fat as your main energy source. And that's good, because you have a long-term energy storage in fat, and that's where you're going to tap into most of it. Your resting metabolic rate, the calories that you burn every day just not doing anything, typically burn fat. And so the more that you can burn through, the more you can release of that energy storage. But, fat also insulates us, like the hibernating bear that gets really fat, keeps us warm, that kind of thing. It is key for vitamin absorptions, like vitamins A and vitamins E and vitamins D. They require fats as the transport to help them absorb. Vitamin B and C don't require those. So that's why you can take extra B and extra C, because they'll just flush right through. They're water soluble, so they'll just flush through your body whenever you have too many of them. If you have too much vitamin A, you can have some serious problems. So fat helps certain key vitamins absorb, and it's a very essential nutrient. It helps with hormone production. If you don't have enough fat, you'll have problems producing, especially sex hormones like testosterone and estrogen and things like that. And that is also something that's very big for fats. So fats are Very important in your diet, just like I feel carbohydrates are, but both of them in my mind are a little bit beneath protein because protein tends to have fat with it. If you think beef and you think chicken and things like that, fat comes with it. So protein is always my main focus whenever I'm talking about macros and setting up macros for your goals, which is what we're going to do right now. So before we get right into your goals, you're going to see why diets are not a one-size-fit-all, because this guy on the left and this girl on the right are going to have drastically different diets, as they should. He looks like a bodybuilder. She looks like, a fitness influencer on Instagram, maybe. And, that's going to be drastically different calorie ranges, different amounts of protein, different amounts of carbs. Just the energy levels that they have are so much different. But I'm still going to give you another example, because basic physiology is completely different from person to person, and what your friend eats and what you can eat are completely different because you're not born the same. Even twins can have a difference because they can have different activity levels. So like you see here, obviously these guys are not twins, but one is a construction worker and one works at a desk. What is going to be needed for a construction worker to work every day is not what's needed to sit at a desk and work every day. I sit at a desk and work pretty much every day, and I don't need nearly as much food as if I was up and I was working outside with my hands and constantly burning calories. The guys on the left are usually the guys that stay in shape and they eat junk food all the time because they're just in a constant demand for energy, where the people on the right, more like me, start to overeat a little bit and they start to notice themselves put on some weight pretty quickly. It's just not burning the amount of calories throughout the day that they would otherwise. So ultimately, the different goals for different people require a different strategy. And fat loss and muscle building are also two completely different strategies. With fat loss, the goal and the way that we burn fat is to eat less than we burn each day. So take in less calories than what your body utilizes, and your body will have to start tapping into stored energy and use that as our energy source. Where muscle building, our goal is to stimulate the muscle group through exercise so it'll recover and grow, provide it the building material that it needs, the amino acids, and then have a surplus of calories because it takes that extra energy for your body to go in and start recovering and repairing the muscle. And if you don't have those calories, you're not going to end up repairing the muscle in the same way, and it's not going to grow the same. So first thing you need to do is determine your specific goal. It's very hard to do both fat loss and muscle building. I mean, that is the holy grail that everybody wishes could happen. It can happen, but it's usually just in beginners because the people that have been doing this for a while have already past that initial fat loss muscle building phase where both things happen at the same time. For those people that are past that, the requirements to do both are much more rigid. You have to think that you need just as many calories to support muscle recovery and growth, but also so little that you can lose weight, which comes down to a lot of nutrient timing throughout the day, really rigid, requirements on your body and activity levels and things like that. So in general, it's just not a good idea to try to do both. You're going to stay spinning your wheels all the time rather than ever going anywhere with what your goal is. So first, we're going to start with where you're going to be the most comfortable. And that's explained as if you were to stay the same body fat that you are right now and put on muscle, would you be happy? Because you may get, if your goal is muscle building, you're going to be just the same body fat that you are, but maybe a little bit extra because you're going to have to eat more food. Versus if you stay the same size, if you're wanting to lose weight, you're going to be the same muscular size because you're not going to build muscle while you're losing body fat, but you are going to lean out. So are you wanting to build muscle? You have to accept that the body fat that you're currently at is where you're going to be while you build muscle. If you're wanting to lose weight, you need to accept that the muscular size that you have right now is going to be where you're at while you're losing weight. So pick your preference. We're going to go over both of them. I'm going to give you guys ideas on how to set this up for each individual goal and a little bit of help to help you figure it out for your specific body as best I can through a training program like this. So for simplicity's sake, we will stick to the two goals, fat loss and muscle gain. Our fat loss goal is to lose weight in a safe, healthy way while doing everything we can to prevent muscle loss. This means we're going to do a steady approach to weight loss over a longer period of time. No crash dieting. 1 pound a week, up to 2 pounds a week consistently is the most that I would like to see people losing weight. Now, there is an initial water weight loss over the first week or two, but after the first 2 weeks, a consistent 1 to 2 pounds per week as a maximum weight loss is your goal, because at that point you start to notice hormonal problems from losing weight too quickly, the balance between your energy levels, the balance between your hunger and your metabolism all start to go wacky, and they don't go back to normal until you put weight back on. So with our muscle gain goal, we're going to try to gain strength over time while keeping fat gain as minimal as possible. And I say we're going to gain strength over time because it's very hard to track muscle gain in something like this. the way you can track that is through strength gains. That's your progress tool, your key performance indicator. Is how much strength are you gaining while you're trying to build muscle. If you're not gaining strength, you're probably not building muscle like you think. So progressive overload is the easiest way to see exactly what's going on. So before we get started into the actual formulas that I'm going to help you figure out to determine your macronutrient profile, I'm going to give you a confession. When I do diets for friends or I do diets for clients, I never use a formula. I've glanced at them a few times, but most of the time I'm determining how I want to do the diet for each individual through pictures to determine the body fat levels that they have currently, which are usually easy for me to see through pictures. I use measurements they send along with me. I get an insight into their day-to-day activities and how much they're moving around and how much they're working out. And those are the main things that I use, along with a body weight. So I have a general idea of how much the person weighs, because a picture doesn't tell you how big they are in person. That's how I set it up. I look at how much body weight they're holding, where they're holding it sometimes. I look at where their measurements are, which tells me, key things like how big their arm is versus their waist versus their legs, for women, hips or glutes, things like that. And then I look at how active they are. And with all those, I set up the diet based off of a body weight and a general idea of where things should be. So things are rarely perfect the first time, as you'll find out as you do this yourself, but I'm pretty good at giving a good estimate of where somebody should be based on pictures and a body weight. And from there, I estimate exactly where we should go. And so is the way you can look at this, rather than looking at it as me bragging about how awesome I am, it should be looking at that even with an estimate on where a diet should be, no formulas, nothing like that, I can set up a diet for people. And if it's not working, I can change that diet until it works. And so in general, you could set up a diet for somebody, get it completely wrong, but as long as you're willing to adjust that diet and fine tune it, you could be in the right spot and get them right to where you want them to be. And so that's what I'm going to teach you in this program. You may not get this right the first time, but over the fine-tuning portion of this program, you're going to be able to really narrow this down into where you want it to be. So on this one, we'll be going through the general protein requirements for your macro diet. You'll see a few examples of protein on the right: eggs, skim milk, things like that, roast beef. I think Dan found this on the internet somewhere. So, it's just a cool picture. So here's a quote from me, I think. Whoops. We'll go back. And it is, protein doesn't vary a whole lot from fat loss to muscle gain protocols. I typically won't change the protein intake unless we really have to cut calories. It's one of the last things to go, as long as it's kept in a reasonable range up front. So what I'm saying there is that protein, whenever you're trying to lose fat and gain muscle, I keep protein very similar between the two. The only time they really change is in a fat loss protocol, whenever I'm really having to start cutting some calories and I don't want to cut carbs or fats anymore. So then I'm going to start tapping into protein, because I need the person to still have some energy throughout the day, and protein is a terrible energy source. So I want them to feel good. I want them to perform, at the best of their abilities in a diet. And so that means I'm going to start taking from protein last. So you'll see with these protein requirements that it's not quite that different from fat loss to muscle gain. And typically whenever I'm doing my diets for myself, the numbers are the same if I'm gaining weight or losing weight. The proteins stays the same, but my carbs and my fats change. So my general recommendation is a minimum of 0.8 grams of protein per 1 pound of weight. So for men, that range varies a little bit. I usually go from 1 gram to 1.5 pounds, 1.5 grams per pound of body weight. And that's for a 180-pound man, that's 180 to 270 grams of protein. So there's a large range there on where you could go. 180 pounds for a man is typically the minimum that I would go to. 0.8 if I'm really at the very end of a diet, I'm dropping it down further, but 180 is about my starting number. 270 is kind of my upper tier for most people. Working with bodybuilders and things like that, I may go up into a higher number. So yeah, so for a lot of guys, 200 grams is the minimum amount I recommend. So I really just don't dip below that 200 gram amount unless somebody, if it's a guy that weighs a lot less, he's 150 pounds, I'll probably dip it down to 180. But for guys that are, 180 to over 200 pounds, I'm really not dipping below 200 grams of protein per day. And 300 being the top range for nearly everyone. Really large bodybuilders would be the exception for that. But most of the people watching this should be pretty average, like I am, and not need a crazy amount. So, for women, we're going to look at a different range. And so, generally I go from 100 grams to 150 grams to make it as simple as possible, which, usually is more protein than is necessary in the beginning, just so that I always know that there is enough protein. But, you know, 0.8 grams per pound is the minimum for women that I usually go with as well. I don't really go above 1.25 grams of protein per pound. So, for example, for someone that's 150 pounds, that's 188 grams of protein. That's a lot of protein for a woman. And most women are not going to need that much protein. But if you're trying to really put on muscle, that's really where I would start being. So, you know, that's generally like the range that I like to stay in for women. So, you know, if a woman is over 150 pounds, I usually give her 150 grams of protein. It's a safe point. It's a reasonable amount. It's not a ton of protein they have to eat. Some people hold more body fat than others. So being over 150 pounds, 150 grams of protein is a very safe range to start with. If they're about 125 pounds or in between 150 and 125, it just ranges from those. 150 is a pretty good starting point for most people, unless you're a lot smaller. And then generally, if you're under 125 pounds, you're going to get 125 grams of protein. So consider that, you know, as my typical minimum starting point is 125. My typical maximum is 150, but the range goes from 100 to, you know, 180 grams of protein for women as well. And so when we get into the fine tuning section is whenever I start adjusting the protein if necessary. And so, you know, this is kind of your starting point, and it's the last thing that should be sacrificed in a weight loss phase. So only when energy becomes an issue do I swap protein for something like carbohydrates, or just drop protein instead of dropping carbohydrates at that point in time. So that should give you a general starting point. If you're a woman who's watching this and you say you're 135 pounds, just 150 grams of protein. Very easy number to go with. If you're under 125 pounds, 125 grams of protein. If you find that you are, heavier than that, I still wouldn't go above the 150 grams of protein unless you're very tall. If you're very tall and you have a lot more size to you just in general, and it's not necessarily a lot of body fat, then you can start pushing that protein amount up. There's not a huge difference between men and women in that area, just the ability to utilize that protein a little bit better. So for carbohydrates, so I'm going to stop here for a second. I'm going to say, guys, I know it's kind of bland and boring right now. I'm telling you like some basic numbers, 0.8 this, 1.25 that. We're going to get into how to do all this a lot better. I'm going to give you examples towards this. So, go through this kind of part with me real quick, and I'll try not to bore you too much with this. But if you do understand why I'm doing it, you're gonna be able to track this yourself. You're going to be able to adjust your own diets, and you're really going to have that freedom and control that you're looking for. So carbohydrates generally are the ones that have the most variance from person to person, because we could eliminate carbohydrates completely, but we also have some people that work more than others. Like we said with that construction worker versus the office worker, that's the reason carbohydrates vary so much from person to person. So if we eliminated carbs completely, the problem that I see is that we want adherence. We want a diet that fits your life, and you won't have to change your entire life to fit the diet. And that's the problem with ketogenic diets. In my problem is that they eliminate a full macronutrient from you. And so all those cravings that you might have, all those different things that you have going on, those meals that you want to fit in with friends and family and stuff like that, it's hard to eliminate carbohydrates completely. And then secondly, there is a rough adaptation into ketosis where it can cause headaches, diarrhea, flu-like symptoms, and generally just make you feel pretty bad because of an electrolyte imbalance, which causes those headaches. And so for some, it's not terrible. So don't get me wrong, ketogenic diets work well. But those are the reasons that I avoid ketogenic diets in general. If getting into a diet is really hard to do and it takes a lot of effort to stick with, most likely, if you have trouble with dieting in general, ketogenic diets just not are going to be the way that you want to go. So, and lastly, like I said before, I believe there's no benefit to leaving carbohydrates completely out of your diet. There is a benefit to moderating carbohydrates to the level that you want them at based on your activity levels, but leaving them completely out of your diet does not have the benefits that the ketogenic diets tell you. It's still a caloric balance. You still calories in versus calories out. So we do want to have the perfect level to support our energy throughout the day without having extra carbs left over. And if you aren't used to tracking carbohydrates, you'll be in for a surprise in how quickly they'll add up. So you don't get a lot of them. So pay attention. For weight loss goals, the amount of carbohydrates I like to use for energy walking around throughout the day, working, exercise, etc. If you want to have a good energy, you'll need those carbohydrates. And we went through the activity levels and the construction workers. So for weight loss for women, a good point is actually very similar to the protein. Since we're looking again at, caloric intake, 0.8 to 1 pound or 1 grams per pound of body weight is a good starting point. So for a woman 150 pounds, it would be 120 to 150. And so on carbohydrates, I will err a little bit on the lower side in general for the 0.8 to 1 gram per pound, rather than erring on the high like I do a little bit with protein. But if that looks like a lot of carbohydrates to you, if you look at 150 grams of carbohydrates and think, man, I don't even eat 70 carbohydrates a day, don't worry about it, because those amounts are actually very reasonable, and I find that most women were able to handle those with no problems and still lose weight, even whenever I didn't change the carbohydrates below 150 grams or something like that. So if you look at this just from a caloric view, if there's 150 grams of protein and 150 grams of carbs, you're looking at, 600 calories for each, because, this is 150 grams times the 4 for the calories, so 600 calories for each. That's only 1,200 calories before we add in fat. So if you're looking at 1,200 calories, and generally, the average of 2,000 calories per day for people, there's still quite a bit of room left. So there's a lot of room to start making changes and things like that. And that's at the high end of the range. If you go a little lower, you have even more room. So a good starting point is the same number as your protein intake. You can match that number if you want to. You don't want to start at the lowest up front. You do want some wiggle room. So I would not start at the 0.8 if you feel like your body can use a gram per pound, but you do want to have some energy. So if you can lose weight, not be hungry, and perform at a top level in the gym, that's your ideal. That's a perfect scenario. You're losing weight, you're not hungry, you're performing well, you feel good. That's a great range for carbohydrates to be in. Whenever you start to have issues when carbs get too low, or for example, if they're too high, you're not losing weight, things like that. But if you can have all of those at the same time, that's perfect, and that's your ideal spot to be in until the plateau, and eventually you're gonna have to change that. So if you're extremely active and believe you have a good metabolism but need to lose some weight just because you eat terribly, and so you overeat, you're the person that generally can eat anything they want, but has noticed yourself put on a little bit of weight, you can move up that range to about 1.5 grams per pound, so that you have more carbs to utilize, because most likely if you've been eating terribly, you've been eating way over these numbers, and going to this number is not going to be a problem for you. It's still probably going to be a caloric deficit. So when in doubt, just start with 1 gram per pound that you weigh. So if you're 150 pounds, just start at 150 grams. Start there. Don't worry about it too much, because the rest of this is an adjustment process. And remember that before you start worrying too much about it. For men, carbohydrates do vary a little bit. 1 gram per pound is my minimum starting point for most men. If you're extremely overweight and you don't do much, we can drop it down to 0.5 gram per pound. Same goes for women. If you're extremely overweight and sedentary, you don't do much, you can drop it down. I wouldn't like you to be sedentary. I'd like you to exercise a lot and burn more calories so that you can have more of these carbohydrates, feel better, enjoy the foods that you wouldn't otherwise get to eat as much of, and still lose weight. And that's the goal. So if you work a very physically demanding job and have been able to eat whatever you want, but you need to lean up, like I was talking about for the women before, I would start at 2 grams. So if you're 200 pounds and you generally eat whatever you want because you work outside all day, especially in the summertime or something like that, start at 2 grams per pound, 400 grams of carbohydrates for your carbohydrate intake, in the beginning, and then start adjusting down. So these are all starting points. We have room to adjust. There's no reason to start at the bottom of the scale, blah, blah, blah. I've said all that. And so, the way I always look at this, we want to coerce, which may mean that you're holding your body at gunpoint, getting it to do something you want, but we want to coerce it. We don't actually want to force it into it. We want to try to persuade it to do what we want before we have to use the physical force to get that. So we don't want to pound it in there yet. We want to get as much as we can out of as little effort as possible at this point in time. Muscle building, this changes quite a bit. So we want to gain muscle, but we don't want to gain fat. The difference between gaining muscle and losing fat is really not that far apart a lot of times. You're looking at an energy difference that's very slight. So if you're going from a fat loss phase to muscle building, or from muscle building to fat loss, if you're doing the opposite, make sure that you take small steps, not giant leaps, because you'll set yourself up for problems that way. So and to take something into consideration, what a fat loss phase is for one person may be a muscle gaining phase for another. So for one person like me, I may eat something that's fat loss, but for, Dan that's in there, it may be muscle building for him because it's, too little calories for me, but more calories than he needs per day, which would probably be true for both of those situations. So with muscle building goals, for women, start at the 1 gram per pound of body weight and move up. So 150 grams for 150 pounds. And the goal is to establish a baseline. So the goal is to establish a baseline where you're not seeing your weight move up and you're not seeing these things move up or move down. You kind of find like this equilibrium. It's considered, a baseline for me. It's kind of where you stay even. And so if you have a fast metabolism and you can't put on weight and you're trying to put on muscle, then you can follow this as well and go up to 1.5 to 2 grams of carbohydrates per pound that you weigh. So I have worked with women in the past that take in 400 grams of carbs per day. I've worked with plenty of them that have been able to take in 2 to 300 during fat loss phases and have no problems. I've had some that I really never dropped below 300 grams of carbs. So they do exist. They're rare. You may be one of those. And if that's you, you may have to push way more food than you're comfortable with. And building muscle, just like weight loss, is not always a comfortable situation. Sometimes it means that you're forcing yourself to eat a lot more food than you want to eat, and you're full and you're distended and things like that. And don't worry, I'm working on a Nutrithority product for that one right now. We'll see what I end up calling it, and I'm sure it'll be another one. That's great. So the majority of women wanting to build muscle will be in that 150 to 250 grams of carbs range. That's for muscle building, not fat loss. So with 250 being rare, most women are not going to get up to that range, but there are some there. So I'm trying to give all the variables in the program. It's an incredibly difficult program to build because there's so many situations where some outlier has happened. Some situation I can think of that causes me to say, but in this situation, this could be true. So I'm trying to give you guidelines to start with without overwhelming you with all the variables, because there are variables. And the thing about the variables is that it's always an adjustment. So you can always change the diet after you've tracked it and you've seen progress and you know what's going on. So for men, the muscle building goals, if you're prone to excess body fat, carbs should stay under control a little bit more. So that may mean sticking to that 1 gram per pound for your carbohydrate intake and not going above that. And most guys that want to put on muscle that are generally lean, not holding a lot of body fat, will go that 1.5 to 2 grams range for carbohydrates. Some that push it really hard will go way up there. I've been in the range of 600 grams of carbohydrates before, but not that I saw a lot better results from that versus something else. I mean, eventually you get to a point where you can only eat so much food, and then you just have to, be okay with eating as much as you start to put on body fat and things like that. And that's kind of where I push it. I push it up to 600 grams to see how much body fat would I gain, and I gained a little bit. So for example, a 180-pound guy will eat 270 to 360 grams of carbohydrates per day. That's at 1.5 grams to 2 grams of carbohydrates for each pound of body weight. So remember, it's not set in stone. These are all generalizations, guidelines. They're all based on adjustment. I'm trying to beat that into your head so that this isn't just a starting point. We're not finished here. We've got to track things correctly. We've got to fine tune it. We've really got to find that sweet spot for you. And I'm going to help you find every single bit of that, because it's not as difficult as you think. It seems overwhelming. It seems like there's a lot going on, but it's not as bad as you think. So for general fat guidelines, remember, fat is the most calorie dense or calorically dense macronutrient out of all of them. So 1 gram of fat has more calories than 2 grams of carbohydrates. I said that earlier in the program. But fats are beneficial for a lot of reasons in your macro program. First, other than the benefits I went over through, earlier, fats slow the rate of digestion, so your food fills you up longer. So you may notice that carbohydrates do give you more volume in your stomach, but if you eat a protein carb meal with very little fat, you'll also notice that you digest that meal a lot faster. And by digesting that meal a lot faster, you're hungrier sooner. And so fat meals, if you went protein fat, on the other hand, protein fat meals will not fill up volume because it's a lot less volume, but you'll notice that you're not quite as hungry. Once your body catches up to realize, hey, I've got food in my stomach, you're not hungry for a long period of time because fat digests so slow. And so the happy medium is to have some carbs, have some fats, so you feel a little bit of full, and you feel a little bit of a long-lasting digestion. Both are where you kind of want it to be. So it slows the rate of digestion, so food will fill you up, but it also helps with hunger, blood sugar stability, which is the digestion rate, and ultimately energy stability by having that energy source and also having that stable blood sugar level throughout the day. So that's the reason that you want fat in there, beyond the other benefits that fat gives you. So general fat guidelines for weight loss goals. In general, fat intake can vary quite a bit if you opt to go for the lower end of the carbohydrate macros. So think, for example, if you say, I love carbohydrates, and I just want to eat as much fruit, and I want to eat as much oatmeal and rice and things like that as possible, and I don't like fatty foods. Like, I don't like almonds, I don't like natural peanut butter because you're crazy, and anything like that. So you may opt to go on a higher end of carbohydrates. So for, a 1.5 grams per pound on carbohydrates. That also means that you may go for the lower end on fat to even that out a little bit. So keep that in mind. If you go for the upper tier on one side, maybe go for the lower tier on the other, or you can keep both of them right in the middle, which is probably where I'd recommend in the first place. But fat intake can vary quite a bit for that reason. So for fat loss goals for women, in the general range of 0.3 grams, I forgot to put grams in here, to half a gram of fat per pound of body weight is a safe range. So for a 150-pound woman, that's 45 to 75 grams of fat per day. And that's not a small amount. That's a pretty good size amount of fat. And I really wouldn't go all the way up to half a gram of fat unless you're taking your carbohydrates down to the lower end of the range. I would find somewhere in between these two, maybe 0.4 is the magic number, but I wouldn't go all the way up to 75 grams of fat if you're a 150-pound woman, unless I don't like carbs, I like fat foods, my body doesn't doesn't respond well to carbs, or you feel like maybe your body doesn't respond well to carbs. That's whenever I would take your fat up. And it's kind of that, almost like the scale, wherever you're going to put more carbs, the carbs go up, the fats go down, maybe you can keep them equal, is generally that equal range is more of my preference, but you can play with it. That's the beauty of this, and it's the fun of all of this stuff, is trying to figure out exactly what works the best for you. And so in those instances where you do go lower on carbs, you do want to increase fat intake so that you have so you have that calorie and energy balance. So for men, this is how this thing is going to go. In general, these are the same guidelines I would use to start men out, 0.3 to 0.5. Not a huge change there. It's all based on body weight. When things are based on body weight, there's not a huge difference from men to women. So now that was a lot of information. And at this point, you're probably about to shut the video off because you're tired of listening to me blab. And so I'm going to keep talking like this says on here, and I'm going to keep reading. But let's review this and put it all together so you can see the full plan, and so that you're not looking back through these notes, trying to figure out, what did he say about this and this, and you're jotting things down while you're doing it. And I'm going to put it all together right here for you so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about. And so, for example, in this situation, we're going to use a fictional character named Nancy. And Nancy is 40 years old. She's 5'5", 170 pounds, and wants to lose some weight. She tries to stay active, but has gained some weight over the last few years and isn't too happy about it. This is a very typical person that I worked with through 316 Fit. She works out 3 times per week, doing a blend of weightlifting and cardio. She's been trying to eat healthy, but doesn't really know how much she should be eating or what she should be eating. And Nancy works at a desk most of the time, but does get up and move throughout the day. So she is not completely sedentary all the time. She is working out 3 times per week, and she's doing weightlifting and cardio. She's trying to watch her diet. She does work at a desk, so she's not getting constant work, like somebody that may stand at the floor of a retail, or, somebody that is working outside or something like that and is very active. So she's a very typical person, I would say. I feel like this is a very good example for everybody. So Nancy wants to lose weight, and while she wants to build muscle, she'd rather lose weight first. Because when she says, am I okay with the body fat level that I have right now and it increasing a little bit to try and gain muscle? She said no. No, I would rather lose the fat first. I can focus on the muscle afterwards, because I would much rather get rid of the fat before I'd rather gain the muscle. And so that's where her starting point starts. So we're going to put these together. So let's look at the protein intake. We have a range, 0.8 to 1.25 grams per pound. With her body weight, that's 135 to 212 grams of protein. So since I like simplifying this process for you, if she's over 150 pounds, as she is, let's start at 150 grams of protein. If you're over 150 pounds, start at 150 grams of protein. Easy. So now let's look at her carbohydrate intake. Our range varies a lot because of activity levels, but a good starting point is that same 0.8 to 1 grams per pound of body weight. We know she's not working outside, and we know she doesn't need a ton of carbohydrates in her diet. So let's just start out at 150 grams, that 0.8 grams per pound as well. So we can always move lower on this one, but that one is a very safe range to go with. So lastly, let's look at her fat intake. We have a 0.3 to 0.5 gram range, but since we started out with a good amount of carbohydrates, we also don't want to shoot for the upper end of the range on fat. So since we did more carbs, let's do a little less fat. 0.3 grams per pound is about 50 grams of fat. Let's start there. So she ends up having 150 grams of protein, 150 grams of carbs, 50 grams of fat. based on our caloric equations, our calculations for each macro, 4 calories for protein and carbs, 9 calories for fat, that's 1,650 calories. Pretty reasonable, right? I mean, 150 grams of carbs seems like a lot. 50 grams of fat's really not a ton of fat. You'll fill that up pretty easily. But 150 grams of protein is a lot of food. This is a good amount of food for Nancy. And so that's a great range to start in. Is it perfect? No, probably not. Most likely this is not perfect. And we're not looking for perfection because we have a starting point. That's the most important part. We have action. We're going to take it. Action over talk. Let's just move forward. Then we'll fix it. And so based off of my estimation of working with a few thousand people over the years, I do believe that this diet would help Nancy move toward the goal she has without feeling too much of it. So anybody can starve themselves to lose weight. That's not hard. It's doing it so that you feel good, perform at your best as much as possible, and are able to stick to the diet while seeing the results and doing it in a safe, healthy manner, which is always our goal with everything that we do. So now you have to find a starting point for yourself. You could go online and find a macro calculator, and there is nothing wrong with doing a macro calculator. In fact, when I was setting up this, presentation here, or whenever I was typing it out, and before Dan created this awesome keynote, I went online and I tested those macros for Nancy based off an online calculator, and that's exactly what I did. And the macros came back right here. So 144 grams of protein instead of 150, and so it's a little bit lower. The total calories is a little bit lower, so they assumed that it was going to be a little bit more aggressive than I did. The fat's 59 instead of 50, and the carbs is the biggest change of 96 instead of 150. But when you look at this, the fat can go down a little bit, so 9 grams of fat can drop, and that means that, easily you can double the amount of fat that you take in grams of carbs based on the calories, 4 grams of 4 calories per gram on carbs, 9 on fat. So we can raise all these up a little bit. If we had 1,650 calories, they would be very similar. So here's your macro calculator. If you want to go do a macro calculator, do it. It's not that important that you do the process manually. It's important that you understand why you're doing what you're doing and then why you have the amounts that are in there, because that's how you can fine tune this. If you don't understand why you have those amounts in there in the first place, then you're not going to be able to fine tune the process. But once you know why you have those amounts, then you can fine tune this, you can get this exactly where you want to, and you can start adjusting things exactly where you want them to be. So I will teach you that process, but before I can teach you how to fine tune your macros, you have to figure out how to track your macros first, and doing that in a proper and correct way, because a lot of times tracking of macros is not perfect. Even with the macro trackers, MyFitnessPal, My Macros Plus, no matter what you do, if you're not careful, you'll fall into some traps and eat way more food or way less food than you really want. And we don't want that. We want it to be exactly the amount that we set up for the day. So thanks for watching the first video. In the next video, we're going to go over how to track your macros properly. And I'm going to give you some examples on my own phone with some apps. And I'm going to go through, doing this manually and all that stuff. So, thank you for watching the first video. I would appreciate your feedback. If you have any questions on this specific video, please contact me and let me know. In the next video, we will discover tracking your macros. You're not eating what you think you are because you're tracking wrong. The different types of tracking, planning your day before it starts, verify, all nutrition labels, everything that enters your mouth gets tracked, and consistency over time being the most important part. So that is it for now. I will be back soon with more videos and more training for you guys on how to properly track your macros. And I sincerely appreciate you watching this and giving me any feedback that you can, because the more that I can do to help you guys, the more, ultimately, the better my responsibility is fulfilled, the better I feel about running this company the way that I truly want to, which is not just selling supplements, but really helping you achieve your goals through using my supplements or not. I just want to see you guys get the results that you've been waiting for and the stuff that you've been working so hard towards to finally get nailed down. So thanks, guys. I appreciate it. See you in the next video.